So there you go. So as long as, if you guys, it's just kind of sideways, as long as you're in here, you'll get it. So you're fine. So you can focus on the audience. So I am going to introduce Loren and Christine. And if you don't know already, I'm originally from Minnesota. I was born in St. Paul, the same hospital as Scott Fitzgerald's daughter or child was born in, not the same year, obviously. But I was born in St. Paul, lived around the whole Twin Cities area, was living in Minneapolis when I moved here to New Mexico in 2011. So I first knew Loren as a storyteller at a class at Metro State University in St. Paul, Minneapolis. That's where I got my undergrad degree. And I think poetry and storytelling are really woven together. And Loren and Christine co-founded in Minneapolis. It's kind of like the Playhouse, a spot where there's classes and events. It's called the American School of Storytelling. So we collaborate. So it's really great to have Loren and Christine here. So Loren's a poet and storyteller.
You don't need to go through all that
I'm not
stuff.
even going to say that. Christine's a poet, storyteller. So I'll let you take over.
All right. Yay. So I'm going to start. I'm going to say first, thanks to Jules and John for the moment. I had intended to start somewhere else, but so we've been the last 2 nights we've been staying at the Zaz Hotel, on Central Avenue, which is one of those old Route 66 hotels that's been redone to make funky. But this morning when we left, we went and got waffles at Wafflepedia, and we're driving. My sister had said, would you take a picture of the old house? Because when we lived in Albuquerque, we lived in a house on Monte Vista. And so from the waffle place, I drove down Cooper till I came to Monte Vista, and we turned and went up the hill, and the old house we used to live in is right next to the sort of the sci-fi houses. It's the little white one next to those. But I was struck by a memory, which is that which prompts a story. So I'm going to tell the 2 stories are connected. I usually don't tell them at the same time, but I really feel I need to do that with this moment. So the first story is this. I'm in 6th grade, Our Lady of Fatima. It is the Catholic school. The nun is at the blackboard. There is a blue bottle fly at the window. Bzz, bzz. He wants to go outside. Oh, hell, I want to go outside. Half the class wants to go outside. We do not want to be sitting in this classroom. And I'm watching the blue bottle fly when all of a sudden I hear Sister Angela say, Tony Martinez, come to the board. And everyone stopped. And everyone turned to look. Because Tony Martinez was, to put it kindly, one of those people who went through 6th grade more than once. I mean, he was at least 2 years, maybe 3 years older than anyone else in the class. He was bigger. And I won't say that he was, no, I won't say he was dumb, because he wasn't dumb. He just didn't want to be in school.
There's a difference.
Yeah, there's a difference. And so he goes up to the board and he's standing there, and she says, Tony, work the math problem. And he's looking at the math problem, and it's like he hasn't a clue. He's just standing there looking at it. And then he turns and he says, no. And everyone in the class goes, what? They don't do it out loud, but they all do it. What? And then inexplicably, he reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out of his pocket a knife and snaps it open. And he holds the knife up and he says, I can live by this. Sister Angela takes the chalk and puts it in his other hand. And she says, you can choose this or you can choose this, but you must choose now. And there was this long moment where the two of them just stared at each other. And then she reached out and she took the knife out of his hand, closed it, and put it on her desk. And he took the chalk and he put it on the blackboard and he walked out of the room and never came back. It must have been a month or so later. And the guys, who all hung out together, I mean, we hung out with Tony. The fact that he was no longer in school was just kind of a mystery to us. What was he doing? And the answer is he was now in the public school, where he was just as uninterested as he had been in the Catholic school. And we were literally down at that little school space where Monte Vista and Copper meet, that narrow spot. And we were down there because it had rained an hour or so beforehand. And this was before Albuquerque had good flood control. And we knew that water was going to be coming. And we were waiting to see what would happen. And all of a sudden there was a trickle, and then a rush. And pretty soon there was a raging river coming down Cooper, headed towards the river. And we were all just standing on the side going, yeah, yeah. When, to our amazement, a city bus comes down and gets to the raging river and hesitates. And then the bus starts across the river to go up the hill to Monte Vista. And we're all going, yeah, okay. And then to our utter amazement, some woman in a Volkswagen tried to use the bus as a block. She was on this side, the bus was on this side, the water was spilling around the bus. I know her intention was if she could just keep the bus next to her, she could cross the street except that when the bus got close to the edge, he gunned the engine and shot ahead, and the wave caught her, caught the Volkswagen, turned it around, and suddenly she's not going to cross the river. Suddenly she's going down with the stream towards the Rio Grande. And Tony Martinez says, that ain't right. And he runs from where we're standing. He runs and he throws himself into the water. The water is up to his knees and is pulling at him. And he gets hold of the Volkswagen. He yanks open the door. And he grabs the woman and he pulls her out of the car. And she's screaming. Now, she may be screaming because of the car is floating. She may be screaming because he's opened the door and is taking her out. It makes no difference. The point is that he's got her and he's tossing her up on the grass where we come and we catch her. And no sooner than we kind of catch her and look, when the car is bobbing again and bobbing and turning, and it hits a little light pole down at the end, a block or so, and then turns and back in the river. Goodbye, Volkswagen. At which point, Tommy Unkovich says, where's Tony? And he's not there. The woman is there. We're there. Tony's not there. And Tommy says, did he stay with the car? When all of a sudden we see Tony on the other side of this little raging river, and he's coming up the parallel to us, and he's saying, look at me, I'm a hero. I saved her. And we all went, yes, you did, but you're on that side and you're stuck. And he was, as were we, until the water finally made its disappearance to the wet street and what we consider to be a good response to rain in Albuquerque. So with that, I'm going to read a poem. I've got a couple of copies of this if anyone's interested, I've got copies of this in the car, and I'll bring some out. This is the Breviary for the Lost. So these are poetry that I began in 1965 and wrote up until the last of the poems that are in this book, or not the last physically, but the last one was written at the start of the pandemic. Most of these poems are written during the 7 years I was in the Christian Brothers, a Catholic religious order. So this is a poetic memoir. What I want to read is one of the later ones. Crow Wisdom. On an afternoon sunlit path, the crow stands calling my attention. The way they do when the world as I know it is about to be turned upside down. Then I remember the story of the rabbi who in times of trouble goes to a certain place in the forest, says a certain prayer, performs a certain ritual, and the trouble passes. The next rabbi knows the place and the prayer, but not the ritual. The rabbi after him knows the prayer, but not the place. The one after him knows nothing, not the place, not the ritual, not the prayer, only the entering of the forest and the story of those who had preceded him. But that is enough. Another step in the air is filled with crows lifting off bare branches, swooping in trios and quartets, their shadows marking the path before me. Like emergency lights in the smoke-filled plane after the landing gear collapsed. The doors flung open. People complained that they had to leave their laptops or take off their high heels to slide down the yellow chutes. What don't you understand? This very moment requires us to at least make an effort. Whether airplane, election, love affair, panic ensues. The crows call out instructions. This is that time. This is that place. Forget any rituals. Say the goddamn prayer and jump. So
How soon was that, or how close that was when you left the seminary?
oh, that's many years later.
Okay.
Many years later. Here. This book is organized in an interesting sort of way because it so in terms of when I left, here's a poem for that. When was the moment? When I knew I could not stay, when the prayers would be unanswered, when I would be unfaithful, when I fell on my knees in gratitude, when I put my shoulder to the wheel, when all doubt was removed, when the fear was finally named, when there was no turning back, when my great heart opened. So
That's funny.
So yeah, I was a member of a religious order for 7 years, and there are stories attached to that, and there are poems attached to that. Here's one of the stories that is attached to that. I happened to enter the Christian Brothers in 1965. Several years after Vatican II, the church was in the middle of upheaval. In 1968, when I was in the Scholastic going to college, at the start of the year, there were 98 of us in the Scholastic, and by the end of that year, there were 36. And people left so quickly that you didn't even know they left until you saw someone pick up their desk and bring it to storage. And I was one of the people who brought desks to storage, and we never looked in those desks. Some archaeologist someday would have a great, interesting process of opening those desk drawers of those desks stacked 4 high, filling an entire barn. But this was before that, this particular story. This was when I was just in the novitiate, and there used to be a ritual on Friday nights, an old church ritual, or if you were communist, a Chinese communist ritual, where you were expected to stand up and march to the front of the room, and we would intone, "My very dear brothers, I implore you, for my sake and that of the community, to name my faults, that I might correct them.
Mm.
Now, you need to think about this. Yeah? You got 32 kids, basically 17, 18, 19 years old, living a monastic life. How many faults can you have? Not only that, how many times can someone say to you, I don't like the way you chew your food? How many times can someone say, you didn't lay sod very well yesterday? Just it became this exercise in what you could bear and what you could give. And so I got up. It was my turn. And one of the brothers, I don't even remember who it was. It might have been Pat McLaughlin. He would do that sort of thing. He says, you shouldn't fart in church, in the chapel. And I'm standing there and I'm looking at this group of people who I'm in the class with, and I'm going, that's utter bullshit. And I stepped off the podium, and I walked out of the common room where this took place. I walked down the hall. I put on a coat. I walked out the door, and I thought, I'm just going to go out to the highway and throw out my thumb. The first semi that comes by and stops, I'm going to get in and I'm going to be done with this. So I walked down the hill from the novitiate, and I get to the little bridge over the stream, and I stop, and I'm thinking, do I really want to do this? When all of a sudden, Marty Jagodinsky comes running down, and he says, Brother John wants to know if you're coming back. And I said, I don't know. And he said, oh, okay. Where are you going? I said, I'm going out to the highway. He says, oh, I'll come with you. And so the two of us start walking out to the highway, and we get a little further, and Chip Wallen comes down, and he says, Brother John wants to know what the two of you are doing. And I said, we're walking to the highway. And he said, oh, okay. He says, oh, by the way, you want a cigarette? And we go, yeah. So the three of us are sitting there. We light up and we're smoking cigarettes, and none of us have a clue except that we know that something is not right. When all of a sudden, we're down at the highway. Mike Schreiber comes down, and Mike Schreiber says, Brother John says we're never going to do this again. We went, what? He says, we're never going to have advertisements again. We're done with that. He says it doesn't work. And I said, you're right. It doesn't. No. So you want a cigarette? Yeah, sure. So the four of us are standing around having a cigarette. And I didn't even bother asking where they came from, but we have our cigarettes, and then we all march back up to the novitiate. And to his credit, Brother John was absolutely true to his word. We never did advertisements again. But that was the moment I knew that it was worth staying, because some of those old church habits might be willing to be left behind. All right, Christine.
I gotta get out of this chair.
All right, thanks. All right. So May of 2018, May Day. I was at the Troubadour Wine Bar in Minneapolis, and I had been invited by David Bayless, who said to me, he's the host, I got Loren Niemi to perform for me. And I said, who's that? No idea. And I saw him perform, and he was good. And then I was hanging out at the poetry open mics around town in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and there is this group of old white guys who were a fan club of mine and who would give me gears every time I came to a reading. And Loren was one of them. And I slowly became Facebook friends with all of them, and I would chat and whatever. And finally, somewhere in May of 2019, Loren was posting about the anniversary of Al's Breakfast. So there's this breakfast place in the what's called Dinkytown, which is next to the University of Minnesota, and it's a galley, like it's the alleyway. They built a kitchen and some stools and a bar top, like 10 seats or 12 seats. breakfast place. And I'd never been there. I worked 5-minute walk from there. I worked for the University of Minnesota, and I had never been there. And he was talking about the anniversary of Owls for Breakfast. And I said, I should probably say something to Loren because I've never ever said anything to him online. We tease each other at the readings, but whatever. And I said, well, you know, I've never been there, and I feel like I should probably go. And he said, well, do I need to introduce you to the culture of Owls for Breakfast at 7 a.m.? And I said, well, as a 50-year veteran, I can't think of anybody more qualified. And so we made an arrangement to go talk about poetry and at breakfast, and we did. And that afterwards, I walked out and I said to myself, was that a date? Because it wasn't supposed to be a date, but it sort of felt like a date. And he's a little older. And, you know, we just did whatever online. And he then invited me for lunch at the Wienery, which is a hot dog joint on the west bank of the Minneapolis campus. And I said, sure, I'll go for hot dogs. And I met him for lunch, and I walked in and he's like, how's your day? And I said, well, it's been kind of weird. He says, well, let me see if I can make it weirder. Are you dateable? And then he said, no, let me correct that. Am I dateable? And I looked at him and I said, it's not a no. Shortly thereafter, Loren Niemi starts talking to me about the American School of Storytelling, his dream that started somewhere in 2016 about establishing a institution where you could teach the art of storytelling, which he had done for 27 years at Metro State University and wanted to do it forever in perpetuity. And in 2023, after the pandemic and after caring for, I served as a caregiver for 3 different people, 2 who died and 1 who lived, not my fault. They were terminal. We found a space. Well, I guess I found a space on Craigslist of all places, still relevant. And we founded the School of Storytelling and opened in August of 2023. So.
Yeah.
So I am the foundress of that organization. I'm the business end of it. I do the marketing. I clean the toilet. I, take the tickets, take the money at the door. But I am a poet. That is how we met. And let me read some. So Loren and I do an awful lot of touring. I'm a road warrior, and he is, and we're here on tour today. And so this is called road tripping. There's pink granite highway whirring past the ominous spin of semi-truck tires. It's a dangerous game of chance, a blowout to ruin your day. Unmarked cars chat in the no U-turn except authorized vehicle zone. Short pines dot the landscape. A tree farm or roadway noise abatement, who can say? Another McDonald's in 10 miles. The billboard for the Falls Motel encouraging us to check their reviews. Dead trees knocked down by some last year's storm. The long layers of cut stone blasted decades ago to make way for the modern world. A fat RV, the retirement dream long worked for, but how much of the day is spent worrying about the septic tank in the back? Electric poles of rusted metal or bleached wood increase in frequency and size as we approach the cities or their supporting power plants, and the rivers flow again. It's spring. Is the overpass for nature or country roads crossing this interstate? The farther out, the bigger the flags in case you get lost and aren't sure you are in America anymore. And miles of construction cones with a single pavement cutter at work. Welcome rest area blue sign, sleep for truckers, bathrooms for beleaguered travelers, the occasional flock of wild birds, and always, always the hairy eyeball of your fellow travelers. This one's a little political, actually. I grew up in rural Illinois, outside of a small city in central Illinois, and made my way to the big city, but lace. The roads lead out past sunset, weave through the scrub brush land, whistle stop small towns no one tangles with since the gas station closed. Someone's shoestring plan, residential utility pavement, past sleepy homes, families with tragedies, enmeshed lives, raw, unfilled expectations. Follow the threads of atlas webbing 2,000 miles and more out of the city, ending at Pacific Blue. This road is also what we have in common. It entwines our cultures and economics. The taxes on all people pay for it. It laces towns and counties and cities. These roads link strangers together regardless of their gender or color or creed. The communities that otherwise have no contact, this grid of our country, bind us to them. The customers and suppliers interwoven, whether we agree on politics or not. Thanks. One of the people I cared for from 2020 to 23 was my mother, who died of leukemia. And I took her on one last road trip to Pensacola, Florida, which was our annual trek before my father died. And this poem ends at the ocean. It ends at the ocean. This poem about what had been, over margaritas at sunset. Of memories of children playing along the beach, my brothers at the bay where our father was stationed in the Navy before you met. This annual trek back to the white sands, Florida's Gulf Islands National Seashore, always in the VW bus, canvas tent to accommodate your growing family. He wanted to retire here, but died young. I chose this destination for your last road trip. You were happiest relaxing on the Gulf of Mexico, and I asked you if you wanted to stay another day. But you insisted we stick to the plan, cancer eating your life away. I experienced the echoes of 3 decades, all at once for what you longed for, twice soundly rejected. Somehow you had to keep moving or never leave. Your grief tormented you with the 3 now gone, netted along this beach of memory. Okay, what else am I doing? Okay. 2 more family ones. Flam. Making fire. I was invited to a backyard fire. They ran out of wood before I arrived. Yard waste, really. Clean up after winter. Now only acrid smoke from dirty ash. There wasn't much, but we were trying for some normal in the midst of abnormal blood tests that only meant leukemia was gaining on her and blood becoming water, life force leaking away. I stole some brush from the neighboring grade school, my arms slashed, flush with rash from the bushes, tangled with fallen limbs, too heavy to drag back. Too worried, nervous neighbor would call us thieves. COVID-19 kept everyone at home except me, 400 miles from where I wanted to be, attending to what was inevitable. I volunteered to help her to see it through, and of all the family, it was but us 3, desperate for joy and light to recede the darkness. It did for a time, for about an hour, enough for a memory of shared memories. Stories of campfires past with those who tended them. Flames and death reduced structures into particles, lifted on the wind above the world, folded into the daily renewal of life. We coaxed flames out of embers into eruption to lick the sky this night. It was one of many lasts, this last bonfire in early spring. And a letter to my sister Kathleen was just got published in Agates by the League of Minnesota Poets. The Macintosh tree our father tended dropped worm-eaten fruit for years after he died. My mother was not interested or able to care for his too large for her yard gardens of his dreams, but then the house burned, and you dreamed of fixing it by some miracle your poverty wouldn't allow. You raged out at the neighbor who would pick the apples. You were going to ban them from trespassing on your land, like that horrible other neighbor who posted keep out signs directly facing our family room for years. There was a raspberry bush in the alley of my Chicago apartment. As I walked home from work, I picked a single berry to taste, like the harvests along the railroad tracks of our youth, or Dad's line of bushes on the white fence that became a home for termites after he died, and the apple-eating neighbors blamed us for the infestation of their home. I remember the angry woman bringing out the garbage, catching me with that single raspberry, the look on her face, later hearing her over the fence yelling at her wife, them out there harvesting the bush in exhaustion. After the job and the kids and the fights, as if I would steal them in the night to make my rival tarts. And I ask you, does it matter if someone took the fruit of a dying tree from a deserted home of a destroyed family? Was it really worth killing your heart? Next one, yes. Okay. Let me bring you back from that. First grade report card note, too much daydreaming. It is the end of a spring day. It is the end of the school year, and the chrysanthemum orange sun sinks into the western horizon. I have no idea where my parents are, why I am standing near the large oaks at school, looking out past the dandelion fields. But what I understand in this moment, after all the years of travel, blessed by my nomadic father, is possibility. Out there was freedom. Beyond the world of my youth, at that age, I was without an answer just yet, how I was going to get to this other place. It was a journey far less starry than my eyes. I fitted the harness and plow, education and hard work, so busy trying to break free from my circumstances, I had no time for dreams. Sun receding into the Pacific, never in motion. I was stuck to a rotating planet, our collective definition of time, always pushing toward tomorrow, away from the light that called me out into the yard. I'll lay out in the night once more, away from city lights and alarm clocks, to await the eclipse of the moon, Earth's red smoke shadow, our whole unlikely existence. I will see what was always true. My life, wherever I am, is as happy as I say it is. Thank you.
So when I was in the Brothers, I did spend a good deal of time traveling, and in part the traveling was based around politics. And I can remember so in 1968, September 24th, 1968, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 14 Catholics went into the draft board and brought out 5,000 draft records in wire baskets and set them aflame with homemade napalm, which they had made using an army manual, basically gasoline and ivory soap. There you go. And they stood around and waited for arrest. And one of the people who was part of that group was a guy by the name of K. Basil O'Leary, who had been, who was a Christian brother, who was a close friend of mine, who had been my economics professor. He was an interesting man because he had a PhD in philosophy, he had a PhD in theology, and the church forbade him from teaching either of those things. He had a PhD in economics and was a Marxist, but they didn't care about that. So he could teach economics. I had driven him to the train so he could go to Milwaukee for the draft file burning. And after I dropped him off at the train, I thought I should have gone with him. What the hell? What is there to lose except maybe a couple of years in prison? But that didn't happen. Although I found myself going back and forth from Winona, Minnesota to Milwaukee repeatedly for the arraignment of the Milwaukee 14 and then for the trial. And the trial itself was an interesting experience. It was May 1969. Milwaukee was exceptionally warm that May. And in the courtyard, the 14 were sitting at one table and the prosecutor was at another table. And the judge, whose name unfortunately was Christ, Christ, Christ is how he pronounced it. And it seemed as though it was going to a foregone conclusion. But sitting in the courtroom, sitting next to me was another Christian brother, a guy by the name of David Darst, who had been part of the Catonsville 8, 9, whatever it was, with the Berrigan brothers. And he had already been tried and already been found guilty and was out on appeal before it was time to go to prison. And so David was sitting next to me. He was wearing a really ugly Mexican serape, and he had his hair pulled back into a long ponytail. And I turned to him and I said, David, what are you supposed to be? And he says, I'm trying to pass as Native American. And I said, it doesn't work. And I said, why are you trying to pass? He says, well, I'm not supposed to be seen with felons. And I went, well, I'm not a felon, but, and he says, yeah, but the rest of us, every time you left the courtroom, the Red Squad or the FBI would slam you against the wall and take your photograph. And after 2 or 3 days, you got a little cocky. It was kind of like, have a good one, right? Did you get that one? But the courtroom got hotter and hotter. And the trial went on and on. And in the meanwhile, when court was over, Kay Basil, David Darst, myself, 5 or 6 other people were all staying together in this little house down in Milwaukee on 27th Street. And we're sitting there one night and we're eating supper. And I hear Basil say, we really ought to do something for the FBI guys. Because the FBI had a car parked across the street watching us come and go. And so it was agreed that we would send a plate of food out to them. And I was designated, since I was the only one who had not been on trial and was not on trial, to take the plate of food. And so I took the plate of food, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, corn. And I went out of the house and across the street and I knock on the window and the FBI guy is, and he rolls down the window like this much. And I say, we've decided that you should eat. We don't think your coffee is good enough for you. And I said, here is the plate. He says, I can't take it. And I go, why not? He says, because I'm on the clock. And I went, what, don't you get time off to eat? And he says, well, he rolls down the window. And he takes the plate of food and rolls the window up. And I go back across the street. And Kay Basil says, so what did he have to say? I said, he's on the clock. And Kay Basil says, when's he off the clock? I said, I don't know. I suppose when the next guy comes to sit in the car and watch. Because it appeared to us that they were there 24 hours a day. Or at least as much as we were. Every time we went, they went. So anyway, after the trial was over, took the jury an hour and a half to declare them all guilty. All guilty. But after the trial was over, I decided that I needed to clear my head. And so I went out of the courtyard, out of the courthouse. I went down to the edge of the freeway. Is it a dog? Is it a coyote? Is it? What is it?
Going over there.
Uh,
Carry on.
Carry on. Anyway, so I started hitchhiking. And as happenstance was, 4 days later, I was here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I had no particular plan in mind, and I had no particular place to stay. And I met a couple of guys at a bar who said, yeah, come on back to the university. We got plenty of room in the dorm. And so I stayed in the dorm for a day or two and chatted with people, sort of got the tenor of the University of New Mexico in 1969, where there seemed to be a race between anti-war and pro-hippie, with a bunch of jocks in between, trying to figure out where they wanted to be. But finally it came to me that I needed to actually go back to Minnesota. And so I saw a note on a bulletin board that said there was a couple who were looking for a passenger to ride with them to Chicago. And I contacted them and they said, yeah, you're welcome to come with us. And so I met them in the parking lot at the U, one of the parking lots, and I got in. They had a very nice Mercedes. And he was an anthropology professor, and she did something else. I don't know what it was. But the two of them said, well, welcome, here we are. And they put the car in gear and we started to drive. Now, a couple of things became pretty clear pretty quickly. One of them is that they didn't speak. All the way through Texas, they said not a single word to me. They didn't say a single word to each other. He drove with just fierce concentration and she kind of did her nails. The other thing that became apparent was that I was getting ill. And whether it was the flu or food poisoning, I could not tell which. But what was clear is that I was on the verge of exploding out of both ends and I'm going to pass out. And in fact, at one point, I did sort of just lay down in the back seat, and in a semi-conscious state, I'm laying there, and I hear them speak for the first time. And the discussion they're having is whether or not they should leave me by the side of the road in Oklahoma. And I kind of come out of my stupor and I say, I promise I won't shit in the car. And then they stopped talking again and didn't say a single thing until we got somewhere in Missouri. Every time they stopped for gas, I would make a beeline to the men's room and sort of, clean up in any way I could, evacuate everything I could. I didn't eat anything. I would drink whatever water I could. And it went like this for 2.5 days. And when they pulled in Chicago and they pull into downtown Chicago, And they leave me, they stop the car, and the husband gets out and he opens the door and he says, well, this is where you get off. And I said, okay, fine. And I did. I got off and I made my way. My brother was living in Chicago at the time, so I made my way to his house so I could collapse and spend a couple of days recuperating. But in thinking about it, I thought to myself afterwards, will I ever have a trip that's that strange again? And it was at that moment I came to the realization that they had violated the first rule of hitchhiking, which is that when you get in a car, within the first 2 minutes, you need to know for sure whether you're expected to speak or to listen. And in this instance, neither of us did either of those things. So I'll do let me do one more poem and then we'll call it done. Well, since poem has appeared twice when I've opened the book now, I might as well read it. Conversation with a man dead some years now. Sitting in the hospice bed, Donald offers chocolates, and I notice that the ones he doesn't like have been bitten and placed back in the box. I eat them, although I don't like them either. We're talking about nothing because the fact of why he is here will not change the outcome. Didn't you used to throw dishes out the back window to the alley dumpster rather than wash them, I asked. They were a nickel apiece at St. Vincent de Paul. Besides, I only did it on nights we had parties. We had parties every week. Foreign exchange students, bikers, Latch Island hippies, a few nuns, if I remember. Yeah, I was always surprised when the nuns showed up, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have invited them. He scratches his head. Didn't one of them come along asking for kissing lessons when she was leaving the convent? True enough, I say. She was a fast learner, and the last I saw of her, she was on the back of Tommy Fig's Harley, headed west. When was that? At your graduation party, though you probably were doing half a tab of Sunshine at the time and didn't notice. He wonders what became of Tommy Figs. I wonder if she thought I was a good kisser. Not as good as me, he says. You should try it sometime. Change polarity. It might surprise you. For the record, I did. It didn't. The stubble got in the way, and leaning over his hospital bed, it was, in fact, the only gift I had to offer. So, anything more from you, Christine? All right. So I guess that I guess that's it, unless conversation, whatever. Requests. All right.
I'm first gonna stop the recording, so thanks to all of our online